The irony wasn't lost on me, standing there with my 3 hearts hammering against my ribs like desperate prisoners. Here I was, Korrath of the Valdris Prime Pack, Alpha of Alphas, watching my own blood, my cubs, bow their massive heads to a creature that barely reached their shoulders. A human. A soft, pink, ridiculous little human who looked like she could be snapped in half by a gentle breeze. But there they were. Thane, my eldest, his black mane bristling with what should have been defiance but instead radiated respect. Sera, my daughter, her golden eyes fixed on the ground in a gesture I'd never seen her make to anyone, not even me. And little Kael, barely past his naming ceremony, his tiny claws scraping nervous patterns in the dirt as he waited for the human's next words. The human's name was Nora Blackthorne, and she was the most infuriating creature I'd ever encountered in my 300 cycles of existence. She stood there, arms crossed, completely unbothered by the fact that she was surrounded by beings who could tear her apart without breaking stride. Her dark hair was pulled back in what she called a ponytail, though I'd never seen a tail that looked quite like that. Her clothing was practical, sturdy, and utterly foreign, fabric that seemed too thin to protect against anything, yet she wore it like armor. "Thane," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent that made every word sound crisp and precise. "Show me the hunting formation we practiced yesterday." Practiced? My ears flattened against my skull. What hunting formation? When had my son been practicing anything with this alien? And why was he moving, actually moving, to obey her command? I watched in growing horror as Thane positioned himself in a crouch I'd never taught him. It was lower than our traditional stance, more compact, and when he moved, it was with a fluid grace that made my warrior's heart skip with unwilling admiration. This wasn't our way. This wasn't how the Valdris hunted. So why was it so perfectly executed? "Good," Nora said, and the approval in her voice made something dangerous twist in my chest. "Sera, your turn. Remember what I told you about using your opponent's momentum against them." Sera sprang into motion, her movements a blur of controlled power that should have been impossible for someone her age. She ducked, rolled, came up in a defensive position that covered her vulnerable spots while keeping her striking limbs free. It was brilliant. It was innovative. It was everything I hadn't taught her. "Where did you learn that?" I growled, my voice carrying the rumble that usually made even the bravest warriors step back. Sera's ears twitched, and she glanced at the human before answering. "Teacher Nora showed us. She says the best fighters adapt to their opponents instead of forcing their opponents to adapt to them." Teacher. My daughter, my brilliant, fierce daughter, was calling this human teacher. "And you," I turned my attention to Kael, who was still small enough that his voice hadn't dropped to the proper bass of an adult male. "What has Teacher Nora taught you?" Kael's eyes lit up with an enthusiasm I'd never seen directed at me. "She taught me about something called physics. Did you know that if you understand leverage, you can move things much bigger than yourself? Watch!" He scampered over to a boulder that was easily 3 times his weight, a stone I'd watched him struggle to budge for months. But now, armed with what the human had taught him, he positioned a smaller rock as a fulcrum, found a sturdy branch for a lever, and with careful precision, rolled the boulder aside like it was nothing more than a pebble. The silence that followed was deafening. "Physics," I repeated slowly. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like trying to speak with a mouthful of thorns. "The study of how things move and why," Nora explained as if discussing the weather. "Your cubs are incredibly quick learners, much faster than most species I've worked with." Most species. Worked with. The implications hit me like a charging bull beast. "How long?" I asked carefully. "Have you been teaching my cubs?" 3 months, Nora replied without hesitation. "They found me shortly after I crashed on this planet. My ship was damaged beyond repair, and I was, well, let's just say I wasn't in the best condition. Instead of treating me like prey, they brought me food, water, shelter." She gestured to a structure I'd never noticed before, hidden cleverly in the shadow of a massive tree. It was built from local materials but designed with an efficiency that spoke of knowledge far beyond what we possessed. The walls were angled to catch and redirect wind for cooling, the roof designed to collect and channel rainwater, and the entrance positioned to provide maximum visibility of the surrounding area while remaining concealed from casual observation. "They saved your life," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Multiple times," she agreed. "Kael warned me about the poison spine crawlers that hunt near the water source. Sera showed me which plants were safe to eat and which would kill me. Thane. Well, Thane appointed himself my personal guardian. He's been sleeping outside my shelter every night, just in case something unfriendly decided to investigate the strange new scents." I looked at my eldest son with new eyes. Thane had always been protective, but this level of dedication to an outsider was unprecedented. More than that, it showed a level of judgment and compassion that I'd hoped to instill in him, but had never seen demonstrated so clearly. "In return," Nora continued, "I've been sharing what I know. Combat techniques that don't rely purely on size and strength. Problem-solving methods that can be applied to hunting, building, even interpersonal conflicts. Basic scientific principles that can make daily tasks easier and more efficient." "Scientific principles," I echoed. Another foreign concept, another way of thinking that hadn't existed in my world until this moment. "Dad," Thane spoke up, using the informal address that he usually reserved for private moments. "Teacher Nora says that learning shouldn't stop just because you've reached adult size. She says the best hunters are the ones who keep adapting, keep growing, keep discovering new ways to approach challenges." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Keep learning. Keep adapting. It was everything I'd believed in, everything I'd tried to teach, but explained with a clarity and simplicity that made me realize how poorly I'd been communicating these concepts. "Show me," I said abruptly. Nora raised an eyebrow. "Show you what?" "Everything. Show me what you've taught them. Show me these techniques, these principles, these physics." The last word still felt strange, but I was beginning to understand that strange didn't necessarily mean wrong. What followed was the most humbling experience of my adult life. I watched Nora demonstrate combat forms that turned size disadvantages into tactical advantages. I saw her teach Sera how to read the subtle signs of weather changes by observing plant behavior and wind patterns, knowledge that could mean the difference between successful hunting and starvation during the harsh season. I observed as she guided Kael through mathematical concepts that made resource allocation and territory planning infinitely more efficient. But it wasn't just the knowledge itself that impressed me. It was her teaching method. She never talked down to them, never dismissed their questions as unimportant or their mistakes as failures. When Thane struggled with a particular combat sequence, she didn't criticize his form. She found a different way to explain the concept until something clicked. When Sera's weather predictions proved inaccurate, she used it as an opportunity to discuss the importance of multiple data sources and the acceptance of uncertainty. And when Kael asked questions that I would have considered too advanced for someone his age, she answered them seriously, treating his curiosity as valuable rather than amusing. "Your cubs," she said during a brief rest period, "are remarkable. Not just intelligent, but emotionally mature. They ask questions not just about how to do things, but about why those things are important. About the consequences of actions, the ethics of choices, the responsibility that comes with knowledge and power." I felt a surge of pride that was immediately tempered by a realization that made my stomach clench. "You're planning to leave." It wasn't a question. The way she spoke about them, the subtle sadness in her voice when she looked at the shelter she'd built. It all pointed to someone preparing for departure. "My distress beacon was finally answered yesterday," she confirmed. "A rescue ship will arrive within the week." The cub's reaction was immediate and devastating. Sera's ears flattened, completely against her skull. Kael made a small wounded sound that reminded me of how he'd cried as a newborn. And Thane. Thane looked like I'd just told him that all his siblings had perished in battle. "But you'll come back," Kael said, his young voice cracking with hope and desperation. "You'll visit us, right? You'll bring more things to teach us?" Nora's expression softened in a way that made something twist painfully in my chest. "I don't know, little one. Space is vast, and my people, they don't often return to places they've already been. They're always moving forward, always seeking new discoveries. Then we'll come with you, Sera declared fiercely. We'll leave the pack, leave the planet, learn to live among the stars. That's not possible, I said automatically, the words emerging before I could stop them. You belong here. This is your home, your territory, your heritage. Our heritage, Thane said quietly, is what we make of it. The simple statement hung in the air between us, carrying implications that threatened to reshape everything I thought I understood about leadership, tradition, and family. Besides, Sera added with the stubborn determination that she'd inherited from her mother, Teacher Nora says that home isn't a place. It's the people who matter to you and the principles you choose to live by. I looked at the human who had somehow, in just 3 months, managed to accomplish what I'd been trying to do for years. Inspire my cubs to think beyond the limitations of their current circumstances while still respecting the wisdom of their ancestors. Tell me about your people, I said, settling into a position that indicated I was prepared to listen for as long as necessary. Tell me about the stars. Nora studied my face for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing far more than I intended to reveal. Finally, she nodded and began to speak. She told us about worlds where the sky burned different colors, where creatures of impossible diversity lived and worked together despite having evolved on entirely separate planets. She described cities that floated in the void between stars, sustained by technologies that seemed like magic, but were actually the result of scientific understanding applied with precision and creativity. She spoke of her own people, humans who had somehow managed to spread themselves across vast distances, despite having no natural advantages that I could identify. No great strength, no natural weapons, no environmental adaptations that would make them particularly suited for survival. And yet they thrived, not through dominance but through cooperation, innovation, and an apparently endless curiosity about everything around them. Your species sounds weak, I said, though the words lacked the conviction they would have carried a few hours earlier. Nora laughed, a sound that was somehow both musical and slightly dangerous. We are weak, individually, but that's exactly why we've become strong as a collective. We had to learn to work together, to build tools, to find solutions that didn't rely on being the biggest or the fastest or the most naturally equipped for survival. She gestured toward my cubs, who were listening with the intensity of students receiving the most important lesson of their lives. That's what I've been trying to teach them. Not to ignore their natural strengths, but to understand that true power comes from combining those strengths with knowledge, creativity, and the willingness to see beyond the obvious solutions. As the day progressed and the shadows grew longer, I found myself facing a choice that would determine not just my own future, but the future of my pack, my cubs, and possibly my entire species. The human rescue ship would arrive soon. Nora would leave, taking with her the most transformative influence my children had ever encountered. I could let that happen, could allow things to return to the way they'd always been, secure in tradition, but limited by the boundaries of our current understanding. Or, I could do something unprecedented, something that would require me to set aside centuries of inherited wisdom and trust in possibilities I couldn't fully comprehend. I could ask her to stay, or better yet, I could ask her to take us with her. Nora Blackthorne, I said, my voice carrying the formal weight of an alpha, making a declaration that would echo through generations. I request passage for myself and my cubs aboard your rescue vessel. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear Kael's rapid breathing and the distant sound of wind through the upper canopy. Nora's expression shifted from surprise to something I couldn't quite read. Calculation, perhaps, or concern. Korrath, she said carefully, you don't understand what you're asking. Space travel isn't a casual venture for your species. The environment alone could kill you. The artificial gravity, the recycled air, the confined spaces. Then teach us to survive it, I interrupted. You've taught my cubs to think beyond their limitations. Teach us to live beyond our world. Thane stepped forward, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both respect and determination. Father speaks for himself, but I speak for myself as well. I want to see these other worlds Teacher Nora described. I want to meet these creatures who solve problems by working together instead of fighting. And I want to learn about the science that makes cities float in space, Sera added, her golden eyes bright with anticipation that made my hearts ache with pride and terror in equal measure. Kael bounced on his toes, barely able to contain his excitement. I want to see different colored skies, and meet people who aren't all the same species, and learn about mathematics that can move boulders. Nora looked at each of them in turn, then back at me. Your people will consider this abandonment, betrayal of everything your species holds, sacred. My people, I said with more conviction than I felt, will adapt. They always have. And if they choose not to adapt, then perhaps it's time for new leaders to show them different possibilities. She shook her head slowly. Korrath, I don't think you fully comprehend the risks. Even if my ship's captain agrees to transport you, which is far from guaranteed, you'd be entering a galaxy where your species is unknown, where you have no legal protections, no established rights, no support system beyond what you can build for yourselves. Sounds familiar, I replied dryly. We've been living without legal protections and support systems on this planet for thousands of years. The only difference is that out there, apparently, we might find people willing to teach us better ways to solve our problems. Nora's laugh was sharp and unexpected. You're serious. You're actually serious about this. Dead serious, Sera confirmed. Teacher Nora, you said yourself that the best hunters are those who keep adapting. What's the point of learning to adapt if we never test those skills in new environments? Besides, Kael added with the devastating logic that only children could deploy. If we stay here, we'll always wonder what we might have discovered out there. And wondering is worse than knowing, even if knowing is scary. The human studied us for long moments, her alien features revealing nothing of her internal calculations. Finally, she activated a small device I'd seen her use before. Some sort of communication tool that connected her to others of her kind across impossible distances. Captain Morrison, she said into the device, I have a situation that requires command decision. The response came immediately, crackling with the peculiar distortion of long-range communication. Go ahead, Blackthorne. What's your status? 4 locals request passage off-planet. Adult male. 2 juveniles approaching maturity. 1 child. Highly intelligent. Already demonstrate significant learning capacity. Pose no apparent security risk. Locals? The captain's voice carried surprise and something that might have been concern. Nora, your mission reports indicated the planet supported only non-sapient predator species. Mission reports, Nora said with a tone that conveyed years of frustration with bureaucratic short-sightedness, were incomplete. These people have cognitive capabilities that exceed most species I've encountered. They've mastered complex concepts in months that typically require years of formal education. A pause. Then, people? Captain, I need you to trust my judgment on this. The adult male is the equivalent of a tribal leader. Their decision to leave will likely influence others of his species to consider broader horizons. This could be the beginning of first contact protocols, rather than a simple rescue extraction. The pause this time was much longer. I could almost hear the captain weighing political implications, potential consequences, and the career-ending possibilities of making the wrong choice. Blackthorne, are you requesting official first contact classification for this species? I'm requesting passage for 4 individuals who have demonstrated both intelligence and peaceful intent. Whether that constitutes first contact is above my clearance level. Understood. Transport is authorized, but they'll need to undergo standard biological and psychological evaluation before integration into general ship population. And Nora, if this goes badly, it's your career on the line. Acknowledged, Captain. Thank you. She deactivated the device and turned back to us. Congratulations. You're about to become the first of your species to leave this planet. The magnitude of what we just committed to hit me like a physical blow. I was taking my cubs, my children, away from everything safe and familiar, launching them into an unknown universe based on nothing more than trust in a human I'd known for less than a day. Second thoughts? Nora asked, apparently reading my expression with uncomfortable accuracy. third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. But not enough to change my mind. Good, she said briskly. Because we have work to do. The ship arrives in 3 days, which gives us just enough time to prepare you for the transition. First lesson. Space travel requires different skills than planet-side survival. What followed were the most intensive 3 days of my life. Nora introduced us to concepts I'd never imagined: enclosed atmospheric systems, artificial gravity fields, recycled nutrient solutions, and the psychological challenges of living in confined spaces with limited privacy. She taught us emergency protocols for atmospheric breaches, gravity failures, and system malfunctions. She explained the social dynamics of multi-species crews, the importance of personal hygiene in closed environments, and the basics of interstellar law as it applied to refugees and asylum seekers. But more than the practical knowledge, she prepared us mentally for the shock of leaving behind everything we'd ever known. Culture shock, she explained, is real and potentially devastating. Your minds will try to process experiences that have no reference points in your previous existence. Colors you've never seen, sounds that don't occur naturally, textures and tastes and smells that your evolution never prepared you to encounter. How do you handle it? Thane asked. You remember that different doesn't mean wrong, she replied, and you give yourself permission to be confused, overwhelmed, even frightened, without seeing those reactions as failures. Adaptation takes time. During our preparation sessions, Nora also taught us about something she called galactic currency, a concept that made my brain hurt with its complexity. Apparently, survival in space required not just knowledge and skills, but participation in economic systems that spanned multiple worlds and species. Your abilities have value, she explained while sketching diagrams in the dirt. Physical strength, quick learning, problem-solving skills, adaptability. All of these are commodities that can be traded for resources, education, and opportunities. So we'll be selling ourselves? Sera asked, her ears flattening with distaste. You'll be offering services in exchange for what you need to thrive, Nora corrected. Just like you do here. You hunt, you build, you protect territory. The only difference is that out there, the territory is opportunity instead of land, and the hunting involves finding the right connections instead of tracking prey. Kael tilted his head thoughtfully. Like how I traded my help moving rocks for you teaching me about leverage. Exactly like that, Nora confirmed. You already understand the principle. We're just expanding the scale. She also warned us about something called prejudice, the tendency for established species to view newcomers with suspicion, fear, or condescension. Your appearance will work against you initially, she said bluntly. You look like apex predators because you are apex predators. Many species will assume you're dangerous, unintelligent, or both. You'll need to prove otherwise through your actions, your words, and your patience. How long did it take humans to gain acceptance? Thane asked. Nora's expression darkened slightly. We're still working on it. Some species accepted us quickly because they recognized our potential contributions. Others required more convincing. And some still view us as upstart primitives who got lucky with technology. But you kept trying anyway, I observed. We kept trying anyway, she agreed. Because the alternative was staying isolated and limited by our own narrow perspectives. Progress requires risk, and risk requires courage. On the second day, she introduced us to what she called universal translation protocols, devices that could convert our speech patterns into forms other species could understand, and vice versa. Language, she explained as she adjusted the small devices to our vocal structures, is more than just words. It's culture, thought patterns, emotional nuances, even humor. These translators will handle the basic communication, but true understanding will require you to learn how different species think and express themselves. When Kael spoke his first words through the translator, his childish excitement came through as formal diplomatic speech that made us all laugh until our sides ached. I am experiencing significant positive emotional stimulation regarding the prospect of observing alternative atmospheric chromatic phenomena, the device announced in perfectly neutral tones. It says I'm happy about seeing different colored skies, Kael explained unnecessarily, grinning so wide his fangs gleamed. We'll work on calibrating the emotional context sensors, Nora promised. though she was fighting back laughter of her own. The third day was dedicated to something Nora called contingency planning, preparing for the possibility that our adventure might not go as smoothly as we hoped. "What if the other species on the ship react badly to our presence?" she asked. "We show them we're not a threat through our behavior," Sera replied promptly. "What if you can't adapt to the ship's environment?" "We ask for help and modify our approach until we find something that works," Thane answered. "What if you decide you want to return home?" This question caught us all off guard. I realized we'd been so focused on moving forward that we'd never seriously considered the possibility of retreat. "Can we return home?" Kael asked quietly. "If that's what you choose," Nora confirmed. "But it won't be easy. Once you've seen what's possible out there, coming back to the limitations of this world might feel confining." "Then we'll have to make sure we don't need to come back," I said firmly. "We'll have to succeed." On the morning of the third day, we heard it. A sound unlike anything our world had ever produced. The deep, harmonic thrumming of engines that could push matter faster than light itself, approaching through the upper atmosphere with controlled precision that spoke of technology beyond my comprehension. The rescue ship settled onto the ground with barely a whisper, its hull gleaming with materials that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of observation. A section of the wall simply disappeared, revealing an opening that led into corridors filled with soft, even light. Captain Morrison emerged first, a human male with graying hair and eyes that held the weight of countless decisions. Behind him came two other crew members, a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms and a shorter, furry creature whose species I couldn't even guess at. "These are our passengers?" the captain asked, studying us with professional assessment. "Captain Morrison, meet Korrath and his family," Nora said formally. "Korrath, this is Captain Morrison, Doctor. Yuki Sato, our xenobiologist, and engineer Rolf Vex." The introductions felt surreal. Here I was, an alpha of a species that had never traveled beyond the boundaries of their own hunting grounds, being introduced to beings from other worlds as if such meetings were routine. "Impressive," Dr. Sato murmured, approaching with the confidence of someone accustomed to studying dangerous specimens. "Bone density suggests high-gravity world adaptation. Muscle structure indicates explosive power capabilities. Sensory organs, particularly the auditory and olfactory development, remarkable evolutionary adaptation." "Doctor," Nora said mildly, "they can understand everything you're saying." Dr. Sato looked startled, then embarrassed. "My apologies. Professional habit. I tend to analyze first and socialize second." "No offense taken," I replied, noting how my words made all 3 newcomers stiffen slightly. Apparently talking predators were still surprising even to spacefarers. "Though I'm curious about your analysis. You mentioned high-gravity adaptation. Your bone structure and musculature suggest evolution on a world with significantly stronger gravitational pull than standard," Dr. Sato explained, her scientific enthusiasm overriding her initial discomfort. "Which means you'll actually find most ship environments easier to navigate than what you're accustomed to." "One less thing to worry about," Sera commented dryly. Engineer Vex stepped forward, his furry features arranged in what might have been a smile. "The real question is whether you can handle confined spaces and recycled everything. Air, water, food. Nothing's natural once you leave planetary atmosphere." "We'll adapt," Kael said confidently, and something in his tone made the engineer nod approvingly. "Good attitude, young one. Adaptation is the key to survival in space." Captain Morrison checked a device strapped to his wrist. "We're on a tight schedule. If you're ready to depart, we need to move now." "Last chance to change your minds," Nora said quietly. I looked at my cubs, my brave, curious, impossible cubs, and saw no hesitation in their eyes, only excitement, determination, and trust in the future we were choosing to build together. "Lead the way, teacher," I said. As we walked up the ramp into our new life, I realized something that made me laugh out loud. My cubs weren't kneeling to the human anymore. They were walking beside her as equals, ready to learn from whatever the universe had to teach them. And for the first time in my life, I was following their lead instead of trying to direct their path. It felt terrifying and liberating and absolutely right. The galaxy, it turned out, was about to discover what happened when you gave a family of apex predators access to unlimited learning opportunities and the freedom to apply their knowledge however they saw fit. I had a feeling the experience was going to be educational for everyone involved. The ship's interior was a revelation in itself. Corridors that curved gently to accommodate different species' movement patterns. Lighting that adjusted automatically to individual visual requirements. Surfaces that provided grip for clawed feet while remaining smooth enough for other appendage types. Smart design, Thane observed, running his claws lightly along a wall panel that accommodated the contact without damage. Necessity, Captain Morrison replied. When you're carrying passengers from 17 different worlds, you learn to build for diversity rather than convenience. As we moved deeper into the ship, passing crew members who represented more species than I'd known existed, I felt the first real flutter of doubt. Not about our decision to leave, that still felt right, but about whether we were prepared for the complexity of the universe we were entering. Then Kael asked Dr. Sato a question about the mathematical principles behind faster-than-light travel, and she launched into an explanation that had my youngest son nodding along with genuine understanding. Sera struck up a conversation with Engineer Vex about resource allocation in closed systems. Thane began discussing gravitational compensation with one of the navigation crew. My cubs were already adapting, already learning, already proving that intelligence and curiosity could bridge gaps that evolution had never intended to span. The ramp closed behind us with a soft hiss, sealing us away from everything we'd ever known. But as I watched my family integrate naturally into this impossible floating community, I realized we weren't leaving our world behind. We were expanding it to include the entire galaxy.